in 2005. Fast forward now to 2011, 2012, and what we know now. Now, a second knowledge, attitudes, and practices survey is to be conducted under the pilot program for climate resilience that Ms. Bernard had mentioned. But there are other studies and other people working that tell us things about what we know about climate change and how we feel about it now. So that same PPCR project did a series of regional workshops on climate change resilience. And it revealed that participants felt that communities were aware of climate change and that people had been, it was highlighted that people were feeling the impacts more, particularly places like coastal communities. The impacts were clearly identified. People could look at coastal erosion, sea level rise, warmer temperatures. They identified all these things clearly. And what other research has shown is that the data that our scientists are generating basically is supported by what people are saying and seeing on the ground. So the scientific data is being supported by what people are saying. Like the fisherman here, what he's seeing is what the scientists are saying too. So basically there is more awareness. And the increase in knowledge could be due to a number of factors. It could be that really, as some of our oral speakers have been saying, we are feeling the thing more. So we know it more now. Because they say, who feels it knows it, we're feeling it more. And the other thing could be, we saw the Voices artists too, that there is more information now about climate change. It is more and more in the public. People are talking about it more, our scientists, our NGOs, our CBOs, the government. So there's more information that people can get from climate change, about climate change. However, there are still some gaps and needs, and these community consultations under the PPCR project had identified some of these too. People felt that there was a need for more information. They felt that they knew generally what was happening, but there was a need to translate the scientific data that Mr. McDonald mentioned into formats that people could understand. There was also a need to share information more. They felt that people knew things, but they couldn't apply the knowledge because of a lack of incentives. And they felt that when projects or programs come into communities, there was a need to share that information about what was happening, the rationale and so on, more with the community. And this leads us to our campaign. So, as was mentioned before, the campaign itself is a part of a 30-month project which aims to help Jamaica to adapt to climate change and contribute to sustainable development, particularly in vulnerable communities, through increasing resilience and reducing risks associated with natural hazards. This is the overall objective of the project. And why the public education campaign? Well, from all that we've said, what we see is that people can feel the impacts of climate change, but they need to better understand the how and why, the science, in order to respond effectively. People at various levels need to engage with each other if we are to adapt as a country to climate change. So there's a need for more dialogue, for more sharing information. And it's not a one-way street in that people are getting information, but they are sharing what they know too. As we see, the fisherman said he didn't go to university, but he had his own local knowledge. And people need to become involved in the process of educating ourselves and each other about climate change. So the goal of the campaign is to increase our awareness about climate change and about adaptive measures that can be taken at the individual, community, and national levels. And as our guest speaker had pointed out, when he showed us those 3 squares, we often neglect the most important one, the individual, what people can do, what people are feeling, what knowledge they need to have to know how to adapt and cope. Moving from that to the community level and then to the national level. Some of our target audiences are some of the people most impacted, our farmers and fisherfolk. We're also looking at children and young people, students and schools. NEPA and forestry under this project are working on protecting watershed areas in the case of the forestry department, and NEPA is looking at protecting our coastal resources. So those are target communities also for our public education campaign. We're looking at vulnerable communities, and not only communities that are vulnerable in a geographical sense, but also vulnerable in social and economic terms. So the disabled, for example, is that community that we really want to look at in terms of climate change adaptation and disaster risk reduction. We are looking at our leaders and decision makers in politics and in the public and private sectors, tourism sector interests, our coastal communities, communities near watershed areas, and we are also doing something for the general public. So there are messages and approaches that we'll be using to reach the wider public. So the key activities under the campaign, we'll be having some parish outreach meetings. We'll be engaging with vulnerable communities. There'll be creative competitions to engage young people, as was mentioned, the use of culture, the use of our culture, the use of relevant and innovative approaches to engage young people. Meetings and workshops with key groups and sectors. And of course, development and dissemination of material on climate change to help people learn more. And a lot of other activities. So finally, the last thing to say to you is that our first campaign stop will be in Montego Bay, April 19 to 20. And we are joining with the Voices for Climate Change family to have a big 2-day extravaganza where we'll have our parish outreach meetings. We'll be trying to meet with the private sector groups, political leadership, reaching out to schools, and of course, working with our artists to bring the message across. That, in a nutshell, is what the campaign is and what we're launching, and I just have a spoon and out to